Thank you all for coming out this afternoon, all of our alumni and friends of TU. We're so excited today that for our Alumni Showcase series, we have one of our own, of course, who is Aaron Hurvitz. He graduated from TU Law in 2007, and then following that, he went to Chicago and gained his LLM in International Business and Trade from the John Marshall School in Chicago in 2008, and now has a very interesting and fascinating practice in Beijing, working for Changzhen. And we're so pleased to have him here today. Aaron actually came in yesterday and met with quite a few of our students. He's given a lot back to the law school, so we're glad that he can share his experience with you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you, Christine, for that warm introduction. And hi, everyone. It's so wonderful to be back here at TU. I did graduate in 2007, and I still have some very warm feelings for the law school. And it's really great to meet the next generation of students and to see some of my old law professors here. And it's really a pleasure to be here. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about the legal considerations of doing business in China. Now, China is really a hot topic. Everybody's interested in China, how to get in on the market and what to do. But some of the real concerns I hear are how to protect your intellectual property or even how to protect yourself from the legal standpoint in China. It is a complicated system. It's very different from the United States. And so I'll just be covering a few areas today. I'll be talking a little bit about China's market. I'll be talking about intellectual property protection and enforcement. I'll be touching on local protectionism, which I think everyone who's ever had problems in China has likely delved into this area. Then I'll be speaking about litigation, speaking about some of, I guess, the considerations that are present when it comes time to litigate and dealing with the courts in China. And finally, I'll just be touching on some commercial considerations and little hints, essentially my top 10 of things you need to know about doing business in China from the legal standpoint. And please, if anybody has any questions, feel free to interrupt me, or I can take them at the end, whatever you want, all right? First of all, just to touch on the market, China has a massive population size. There are over 1.5 billion people spread throughout the entire country. It's the second largest economy in the world, and it's the fastest growing economy. I think the annual growth rate is about 10%, although the numbers are slightly skewed. I've heard sometimes as high as 15% growth. China exports roughly $1.2 trillion a year. Now, everyone thinks China is a major manufacturing hub, which it is. In China, pretty much almost everything in this room was likely made in China at some point. And China's use of their inexpensive labor force has really allowed them the opportunity to undercut production costs from all the other countries around the world, making China a prime spot for everyone to do business in and to produce in. Now, there are some considerations. China has taken, it's a real priority of China to maintain a debt-free economy, and it's allowed China to really grow and become a main competitor on the global stage. China offsets their exports by only importing $950 billion worth of goods, so there's a massive trade surplus. Here in the United States, some of the main arguments with China are with regard to the trade deficit, and so this is just evidence of such. Presently, China's major needs are deal with manufacturing and fossil fuels, petroleum, iron ore, and scrap metals, which directly correlate to China's massive growth and their need to continue to build and develop. And finally, China lacks in scientific and medical products. China has one of the largest, I guess, elder class groups in the entire world of almost 500 million people. 500 million people are in China's sort of, I guess, 50 to 70% age range. And China's really lacking in advancement scientific products to cater to those individuals. Now, as I mentioned, China is one of the largest markets in the world, and it has vast potential. Now, companies who are interested in doing business in China truly do lack the understanding of the local laws and the business culture, and so oftentimes they run into trouble when it comes time to do business in China. I think having a basic understanding of how the legal system works, a company doing business in China can certainly gain a competitive edge over those who really don't understand and aren't familiar with the system. Now, first we're going to talk about intellectual property and discuss really the 5 ways to protect your IP. There's the civil judicial, administrative avenues, criminal judicial, customs measures, and other sort of protective approaches, which I'll discuss. Just to sort of briefly go over the civil judicial system in China, there's a 4-tier court system. There's the Supreme Court, which is at the national level. There's only one Supreme Court. There are high courts, which total 31, which correspond to the 31 provinces in China. There are over 400 city-level courts, and all of which, certainly on the IP side, all of which can handle trademark cases, but it's important to note that only 71 are able to handle patent cases. This is because the judges just don't understand the technology, they're not as advanced, they don't necessarily have the education to take on such a task. At the district level, there are over 3,000 cases, and only 40 can handle trademark and copyright cases. So in terms of getting venue and jurisdiction, which I'll talk about a little later, it's really important to choose the right court. Otherwise, you may have a judge who has never heard of intellectual property. And the legal system's really increasing in China. Last year, you could see some of the trends. Last year, there were over 30,000 civil cases in the first instance, which is an increase of over 25% from the previous year. The patent side's up 10% to roughly 4,400. Trademark cases have reached almost 7,000, which is a 12% increase. And copyright cases were up 30% to over 15,000 from the previous year. Now, I like this case. This is called the Neoplan case. Neoplan is a German bus company who made this beautiful Starliner luxury bus that they were manufacturing and selling in China. They had something called a design patent on this bus, which you could protect the design of your intellectual property. And everything was going great until a Chinese company called Zhongwei decided to, I guess, more or less infringe on this design patent and were essentially building the identical bus other than the front headlights, which were sort of a different shape. One were more circular, the other were more oval. And Zhongwei justified that as being completely different, and there's no mistaken identity of the two. This obviously translated to a significant undercutting of Neoplan's profits because Zhongwei was able to produce these buses for significantly less and then were able to sell them for a lower price. Now Neoplan sent cease and desist letters, and Zhongwei responded saying, look, it's almost impossible to prove the evidence and present the evidence required for a design patent case, so we're going to keep on doing it. Sue us. We don't really care. How are you going to get the necessary documents to the court? So litigation ensued in 2009, which resulted in an award for Neoplan of almost $3 million, which is 21.2 million RMB. And what Neoplan did is, instead of balking at the threats by Zhongwei, they simply drove both buses up to the court and had the judges come outside and look at the buses, and the case was over within a day and a half. It was as simple as that. So it's a little taste of the Chinese-owned medicine here, but what this demonstrates is that foreign companies are actively enforcing their intellectual property rights in China, specifically on the litigation front. Now we move on to sort of the administrative avenues. We talked about, just very briefly, the litigation side. Now another method to enforce your intellectual property is purely on the administrative avenues, and those are the Administration for Industry and Commerce, the Intellectual Property Office, Copyright Administration Bureau, Technology Supervision Bureau, and the Food and Drug Administration. And we all probably have heard of the FDA in China because some years ago, I imagine everybody probably heard of the melamine issue that the Chinese were depositing in baby formula. Melamine is a form of a plastic powder, and so the FDA was sort of involved in this. And in recent years, there's been a significant trend of over 50,000 trademark cases, 30,000 copyright, and over 1,000 patent cases heard every single year. Now, the AIC is the Administration for Industry and Commerce, and they have the power to investigate trademark infringements. They're on the state, the provincial, the city, and the county level. There are over 3,000 offices all throughout China with a staff of more than 500,000 people. Now, China has no shortage of labor, so they're able to employ as many people as they want, essentially. The AIC, if they learn about trademark infringement, they can issue an injunction, they can confiscate and destroy the goods, and the goods and tools used to make these infringing materials. They can't award damages, and so the AIC, if they notice trademark infringement, they'll pursue it on their own, or as a rights holder, you can take your own initiative. Now, Motorola in China really love this case. In China, there's a major problem with cell phones being infringed and knocked off. You can walk around the street and probably 80% of the cell phones you see are not real cell phones. And so Motorola they had massive infringement. Everybody was making Motorola cell phones in China, and they were losing a significant amount of income every single year, revenue every single year. So Motorola decided to get with the government, the media, the local AIC, and to go in and actually raid these factories. They identified through investigation a number of these factories and actually went in and seized thousands upon thousands and thousands of these cell phones. And this was really the first time cell phone companies in China aggressively enforced their intellectual property. Before that, it was running rampant and there was nothing they can do. But now there are really positive results. And at present, most mobile phone companies actually they're actively enforcing their IP in China. Now we're moving on to the State Intellectual Property Office, which is SIPO for short, and they're responsible for dealing with patent infringement issues and enforcement issues throughout China. Now, when an infringement case is established, the Intellectual Property Office, they're going to attempt to mediate the dispute and try to work out some sort of compensation between the rights holder and the infringer. Now, mediation is really important in China just based on the culture and society where fighting is sort of the last resort. Everybody wants, as the Chinese say, to have harmonious nature in dealing. And so mediation, in their mind, is really a productive way to get that done. Now, of course, if mediation fails, you move on to court and have to duke it out in front of a judge. Now, when infringement is established, if the Intellectual Property Office determines that there is infringement, they can confiscate up to 3 times the illegal earnings. And if there are no illegal earnings, they can impose a fine of about 50,000 RMB, which translates to roughly $7,500, depending on the exchange rate in the day. It's actually very, very difficult to determine the profits of the infringers because it's not like you can walk into a Louis Vuitton warehouse who are making these fake bags and say, listen, I need to see your books because I'm going to sue you, so please, how much did you make on these bags over the last year? They're not so inclined to do that, and as I'll touch on later, there's no formal discovery process in China, and so gathering evidence is very, very difficult. Now, if the infringement constitutes a crime where you reach certain thresholds, the Intellectual Property Office can turn it over to the local cops, which are the PSB, the Public Security Bureau. They do have less enforcement power, overall enforcement power, than any of the other agencies, but that is improving. Now, criminal judicial avenues are a lot of fun because you attempt to throw the bad guys in jail for making fake Louis Vuitton bags and infringing somebody's patent. Most cases are accepted by the local police after a thorough investigation, handed over to the prosecutor. It goes through the first instance proceeding, it's appealed, and then to the second instance, and then that's the end, and hopefully the guy's in jail. Last year, there were over 3,500 cases with 5,500 people being found to have committed a criminal offense, and these people were actually thrown in jail. Now, it's sort of a difficult situation. It's actually really hard to get people put in prison and prosecuted for this because in China, with a population of 1.5 billion people, you imagine that they have sort of limited jail space, right? There are a lot of people who are doing a lot of bad things in China. And so I guess the courts are more inclined to reserve the limited jail space for those who have, maybe done a little more serious offense than knocking off a Louis Vuitton handbag, that's reserved for murderers or whatever. So the court is sort of hesitant to throw people in jail, but it is a wonderful deterrent because I imagine that Chinese jail isn't a place you probably want to spend much time. Now, I spoke a little bit about the PSB. They're the equivalent of China's police force, and they have the power to approve formal arrests and to file prosecutions with the court. If the local cops don't think that there's a criminal offense, there's really nothing you can do. And so it's important to really liaise with the local police when you're undergoing an investigation or trying to pursue some sort of enforcement. Now, the cops determine IP infringement based on 7 factors, and these are according to Chinese criminal law. It's everything from counterfeiting registered trademarks to forging somebody else's patent, selling goods bearing somebody's trademark, or infringing commercial secrets. And you could see sections 213 through 219 here. And so how do you really get there? A lot of our clients in China, they all ask me, listen, well, they're infringing our intellectual property. Let's throw them in jail. Let's go ahead and do this. It's not as easy as you might think, unfortunately. There are really 3 ways which you can establish criminal prosecution in China. First, there's public prosecution, which is initiated by the local police. And that's really on request from the rights holder of the intellectual property, although sometimes an action is initiated ex officio where another administrative agency or the police will see blatant infringement and they're going to pursue this on their own initiative. Second's actually through private criminal prosecution. In China, you can utilize a local law firm who will actually file a lawsuit against an individual and pursue it in criminal court. You don't necessarily need to file a police report. Although private prosecution is rare, the trend is starting to grow in China a little bit. And I know it seems kind of weird because here in the United States, you can't just go down to your local law firm and say, hey, I want to throw this person in jail. I want you to take care of it. So it is a major difference between China and the United States. And the third way is using one of the administrative agencies, which I spoke about, like the AIC or the Intellectual Property Office, the Trademark Office in certain instances. And they actually recommend the case to the local police, and then you go forth with criminal prosecution. Now, the local police in China are extremely limited in the resources they have, in their numbers, and you imagine the size, China's the size of the United States, and they don't have enough sort of national police to do the job. And there is only one police force. There's no local police. It's only the national police. And so oftentimes the Chinese government will undergo sort of I guess you can say, a public enforcement endeavor, where they'll attack certain areas of intellectual property infringement, which are usually based on dealings that involve public health and safety issues. Now, for example, this quote here says, look, essentially some of the main areas are dealing with counterfeit food products and pharmaceuticals or state monopolies. And in this case, the Chinese government will devote significant resources to tackling that. If it deals with the public health and safety, such as the melamine issue, or when we have lead in paint, or something of that sort, or dealing with counterfeit pharmaceuticals, which is rampant in China, the local police, on sort of request from the high courts or from the government authorities in Beijing, will undergo significant efforts to sort of eradicate the entire problem in China. Now, oftentimes, if this doesn't take place, the IP rights holder bears the burden of proof to gather evidence of the infringement, to bring forth enough documents to take to the police, and then hopefully they'll pursue the case. So considering the previous slide here regarding the enforcement endeavor that the PSB goes through occasionally, it's really important to maximize your enforcement potential. You have to essentially ride the coattails of whatever the Chinese government's doing at the time. One day or every 6 months or so, they sort of change their target area. When it deals with, sometimes they go after the food and drug industry, and so it's a wonderful time to pursue your pharmaceutical agenda. As I mentioned, pharmaceutical products have massive problems in China. So if the PSB is really attacking counterfeit food products, alcohol, for example, tobacco, it's really a great time to push your pharmaceutical agenda. I know we hear about all these fake DVDs in China and everything like that, and truthfully, they're all over the street. I mean, you can buy Avatar 2 days before it came out in the United States for $1 in its perfect quality. So there's a huge problem in China. And oftentimes the PSB really goes forth to try to attack the counterfeit DVD industry. And so when they do that, perhaps it's a wonderful time to pursue yours or your client's copyright agenda in China if they're experiencing infringement. So again, it's essential to sort of ride the coattails of whatever the local police and the local government, their current agenda is. So be creative. Now, Chinese customs is very interesting. China is one of the only countries that I know of in the world that actually cares about what's being exported from the country. Here in the United States, if we send a package to China, U.S. Customs isn't going to be really concerned with what's in the box. It's leaving our shores. That's it. But in China, about 70% of their main concern is what leaves the country. They're concerned about state secrets going out and other sensitive issues to the Chinese government. But also this truly helps on the IP side because they monitor and they investigate basically all sorts of intellectual property infringement that leave China by ship or by air or overland. Now, this really started in 2004 when the customs regulations were implemented, and then implementing measures were issued in March of 2009. Now, the items you can protect in China in terms of customs protection are copyrights, China-registered trademarks, and patents. Unfortunately, at the moment, trade secrets and foreign IP rights that haven't been registered in China you're unable to protect that using customs. Now, Chinese customs is a very, very interesting situation because at least on the intellectual property standpoint, it's a great way to protect your IP. I know we've been picking on Louis Vuitton, for example, but these purses are apparently, I guess the girls might know this better than us, but I guess these purses go for $2,000, $3,000 for these big bags. Everyone in China is carrying a Louis Vuitton bag, these massive bags. These 22-year-old girls are carrying bags that cost thousands of dollars, and the average salary in China is about $500 a month. So it's either they're saving their entire salary for half a year and buying a purse, or something else is going on here. Now, Louis Vuitton has massive infringement issues in China, but their standpoint is, why am I going to spend $50 million to litigate every case and to go after every factory, go on raids, do whatever I have to do? Their main concern is they're looking at the big picture. What they're concerned about is these goods leaving China. The minute they leave China and go to the United States, Europe, Australia, other countries where people can actually afford to purchase the real bags, Louis Vuitton starts losing a lot of money. They lose a lot of their market share. Even in China, they have Louis Vuitton stores, and the rich Chinese who can afford the bags, they obviously wouldn't be caught dead with the fake one. They'd rather just go to the LV store. So they take this into consideration and spend all their resources protecting the goods and making sure these bags don't leave China. Now, there are two really basic approaches to utilizing customs in China. There's the passive approach, where a rights holder simply records their rights with customs and says, listen, if you see a bag bearing Louis Vuitton leaving the country, stop it. It's not ours. And they just leave it at that. And it's a simple thing to do, and you hope customs catches it. That's it. The other approach is taking really more of an aggressive approach to enforcing your IP using customs. And this is when the rights holder actually goes out and investigates, determines where the infringement is, figures out the course. If these goods are leaving a certain factory and going to a port, they actually notify customs of this fact. And so customs is ready, they know the container shipments, and they actually stop it based on the rights holder actively asserting their right in China. It's really a fantastic thing to do, and these cases have increased dramatically over the years because of its effectiveness. Just as a practical example of this, K2's they make sort of sportswear, and they sell in China, and they actually manufacture their goods in China. I'm not sure if you've heard of the brand, but K2 experiences a ton of infringement. They have actually 2 factories they use to produce their goods, but the last time we checked, there were over 12 factories that were not licensed who were making K2 products, selling them in China, shipping them out to the U.S., and these goods are almost identical. You really can't tell them apart. So K2 is having a serious problem with this. So they registered their rights with customs in Qingdao, which is a port city in China, and a container load of this, or I guess here 2,700 articles, were bound for export out of China. Now, Chinese customs, they saw this, they saw the infringing goods, and they inquired to K2, who had registered their right, and they asked, if you're shipping out 2,700 goods bound for San Francisco or wherever these things are going, K2 said, no, of course we're not. And so litigation ensued, and it was against a company called Qingdao Shendi, and K2 actually won this case for trademark infringement in court. And so this is a successful situation, but what I really find fascinating about this is, up until this point, K2 had no idea who the infringing factories were. They didn't know where their goods were being made. They didn't know how it was happening or how the system worked. But because they registered with customs automatically notified them who the exporter was, and then K2 just simply traced it back all the way to the factory, from the exporter to the distributor to the actual factory. And so they started breaking down the puzzle and knocking the legs out from under the table and really combating their IP in China. So it is a very, very effective tool. So if customs finds goods to be infringing, they're supposed to detain the goods and ultimately fine the infringer by up to 30%. Now, with the goods, a lot of people say, Aaron, what do you do with the container load of these purses? Do you sell them? Do you keep them? Do you give them to your friends? What happens with these things? What customs is supposed to do is to either donate them to an approved social welfare organization, which I'm not sure they need Louis Vuitton handbags. They either sell them to the rights holder, which certain companies buy because they just say, you know what, I'm going to buy these infringing goods no matter the price. They auction them to the public, which after they remove the infringing characteristic, they try to do, but in certain situations, you probably can't, bleach a purse and send it out. And finally, they destroy the infringing goods if the infringing characteristic can't be removed. Disposal is obviously a huge concern for the rights holder because they're usually not present when the goods are disposed of. And so unfortunately in China, there are some holes in the system where a lot of these goods are coming back into the stream of commerce through back channels. And so essentially you're continuing to fight against yourself and you're spending a lot of money for really nothing. But China is a member of TRIPS, and so if the mere removal of the infringing characteristic is not sufficient, they actually have to destroy these goods, and they can't go back into the stream of commerce via auction or selling them or donating them. So things are sort of improving. And Chinese customs has a massive global impact. They continue to grow in scope and size. They have to balance domestic and international pressures, especially as China continues to become such a major trading partner, major manufacturing hub. And China is becoming more of a global player in other areas. And so the goods that are coming in and out of China are becoming a significant concern for, certainly in the intellectual property sense. Last year, there were over 12,000 shipments detained. And I'm not talking about like a box of goods. I'm talking a shipment, several container loads of stuff being tried to send out of China, of infringing materials. And that translated to over 650 million infringing goods. It's a lot of stuff that is being manufactured in China that's trying to get out to the United States. And this is probably just a small percentage of the total number of goods that are actually being caught. And it's everything from purses to razors to pencils and pens to chairs and desks. We have a client they're an automotive client, and they're experiencing problems with counterfeit wheels and car parts going out. We experience problems with pharmaceuticals, which is never good because you don't want your heart medicine to be essentially talcum powder. That would probably not be so much of a positive experience. So China's really attempting to curtail the importation and especially the exportation of infringing goods from their borders. Now, who's heard of the phrase local protectionism when it comes to China? Has anyone heard of that? Well, what it means essentially is, for a very long time, what it meant is that when the foreigner would try to fight the Chinese, the foreigner would lose. That's it. I don't care if it's a cut and dry case. The local courts would side with the foreigners. The U.S. government, as well as other lobbying groups in the European Union, have lobbied the Chinese government for a number of years to sort of fix the problem of local protectionism. They wanted fair dealings in the court system, and they wanted essentially for foreigners to have a fair chance at enforcing their IP and other rights in China. It was directed at the central level authorities in Beijing, but they're merely a legislative body. They're not at the implementation level. Now, the local leaders, they understand and respect IP. They know that there's problems, but they're sitting high in Beijing in their nice houses, going to work every day in the capital. They're not at the local level in some of these small provinces and small cities where the judges, they have no idea what intellectual property is. They don't care. Specifically, they don't want to side against their neighbor who may work at the factory. Their cousin could be the general manager of the factory. A lot of times these factories employ 3,000, 5,000 workers. And why would a judge who lives in this township, who knows probably the majority of these workers, why would he side with the foreigner who simply says, look, you can't make my purse here or make my T-shirt, or you're infringing my goods? The judge really has to balance the interests here, and he obviously doesn't want to make enemies with 3,000 people in his township. So, as I mentioned, the enforcement as such is really at the local level, so it's quite challenging. There's a questionable level of commitment for piracy and respect for intellectual property. So, okay, what's the deal here? How does this actually pan out? Well, it's important to note that these little economic zones are run by a single administrator. And this administrator advances himself politically and through his career and financially based on how well his economic zone is doing. So that is all he cares about, is how high he can rise through the Communist Party or professionally. And counterfeiting is a major boost to the local economy. I think I saw some figures that counterfeiting in China accounted for something like almost between $60 and $70 billion a year. I mean, that's a ton of money here. And it employs tens of millions of workers. And so it's a major industry, and it's a real boost to the local economy. Further, these infringing factories and whatnot who are making counterfeit goods, they employ a lot of workers who were unemployed before, and unemployment's a major problem in China, which is a communist country. Also, it pumps in a significant amount of tax revenue into the local government, and it also supports other local industries like hotels, restaurants, nightclubs, karaoke bars, whatever there is. But workers have money to spend, and so the economy of the entire area is actually being supported. Now, Yiwu is a very famous town in China. It's in the Xinjiang province, which is south of Shanghai, and capital is Hangzhou, if you've just so I guess you have your bearings a little bit. It's a well-known center for commercial piracy and counterfeiting in China. There are over 200,000 customers who visit these stores on a daily basis, and there are over 33,000 wholesale stores. I'm not talking about a little DVD shop. I'm talking about a major, think Costco here or Sam's Club, of infringing stuff. So 33,000 of these, with over 100,000 varieties of goods. And experts estimate that there are over 90% of all these goods are infringing or counterfeit. And so Yiwu serves as a distribution center for all of China. They make the goods in Yiwu, send them to Beijing to sell to the foreigners or whoever, export them. They also export goods from Yiwu to Africa, Asia, South America, and they're starting to export them to the United States. So in 1997, the last year that public figures were made available, the total business of Yaiwu, this little township, was more than $2.4 billion in counterfeit goods. This one little township. Now, that's more than the total for most multinational companies doing business in China, probably most multinational companies around the world. So this is a ton of money. This isn't a little problem. The local taxes go to the local government. It helps support local services. And actually, most of the businesses that sell these counterfeiting goods, they work out some sort of deal with the local government and pay a set amount of taxes. The government's happy. They're making revenue. And so when you have a situation like this, how are you going to shut Yaiwu down? You can't walk in there and call in your connections and simply shut it down. They employ hundreds of thousands of workers, and it's a $2.4 billion a year industry, at least in 97, which is 13 years ago. I imagine it's almost twice this now. In fact, Yaiwu was a small farming town, and probably 15, 20 years ago, they started really getting into counterfeits, and now it turned into this global monstrosity. And actually, a lot of other small local towns are trying to emulate Yaiwu, and so counterfeiting is still a major problem in China. So the local leaders are totally reluctant to shut Yaiwu down. They have direct financial interest in this illegal trade. The local AIC, and if you remember, the AIC, Administration for Industry and Commerce, they were the ones who protect your IP. They're one of the administrative avenues which we talked about earlier. They actually have invested millions of dollars in building these wholesale markets. And you think, okay, I don't understand this. Why would an agency who's here to help enforce our IP actually go and contribute to it? Well, they build these facilities. They get monthly management fees. And there are obviously other financial interests in things going on. And so they sort of turn a blind eye or do, essentially all they have to do to achieve some results. But the scariest part of this is the bulk of the counterfeiting is actually owned by current and former government employees, officials, and party leaders in the communist government. And so even if you call your highest connection, they're not going to be able to trump somebody who's a member of the Communist Party or a state leader or whatnot. And so I know everybody sits here and says, oh my God, China, this is the Wild West. How does this work? Like, what sort of law is there? Things are improving dramatically. It's going to take a little while, though. I mean, in China, in terms of intellectual property, the laws are quite strong, but you have to realize that there isn't even a real developed set of personal property laws or real property laws in China. And so this notion of wrapping your head around intellectual property where this is my design or this is my invention, so you can't touch it, most of the Chinese, they're not really able to understand this at the local level. So it's really a difficult situation, and there's a lot of influence by the local officials to try to make sure that things stay the same in China. Further, look, Yaiwu is an extreme example. I'm hoping that there aren't more, $2.5 billion townships here who simply infringe and counterfeit all day long. But there are other problems throughout all of China. Local enforcement officials are involved. The AIC is involved, as I mentioned. There are bribes that go on. Prosecutors and judges are involved. And judges have a serious problem because all judges in China, certainly at the local level, not the Supreme Court, they're actually hired by the local administrator, who I spoke about. They appoint these judges, and they're at the whim of the local administrator. They're not appointed for life terms. They could be fired at any point. And so anytime a major case comes through, these local administrators are on the phone trying to influence the judge and have the judge sort of side with the locals. So we talked about the Chinese market. We talked about intellectual property enforcement. We spoke a little bit about local protectionism. And now I'm briefly going to go through sort of litigation in China. We're going to talk about the procedural considerations, jurisdictional considerations. We'll talk about the unpredictability of the civil law system. We spoke about local protectionism and undue influence, but I'll touch on it briefly again. We'll talk about discovery and evidence, damages, enforcing domestic judgments, enforcing foreign judgments, and then using arbitration as a real alternative. So in China, it's important to know that only licensed PRC lawyers can appear in court. As a foreigner, I can merely advise and consult on Chinese law. I can never become a Chinese lawyer because I'm not a Chinese citizen. I was told that if I wanted to give up my U.S. citizenship and become Chinese, I could actually argue in court, but to me, it's not worth it to have to get a visa to come back to Oklahoma or to California or something. So there's actually 2 foreigners that I know about who are actually thinking about giving up their citizenship in their various country and becoming Chinese so they can sit for the bar. The court system in China is influenced by German law. It is a civil code system, and the courts are very inquisitorial here. They don't take a passive approach. They take a very aggressive approach and proactive, where they'll attempt to find a solution to the problem instead of litigate and to go into all-out litigation for this. And as I mentioned earlier, it is a four-tier court system. Now, personal jurisdiction and jurisdiction over property is very similar to here in the United States. It's determined by domicile, place of business, where the alleged injury or conduct took place, and the location of the property and general consent of the parties. Now, the plaintiff in this situation must have certain minimum contacts with the local forum in order to bring a case to its courts. There is a 2-year statute of limitations, and to really utilize the system and to benefit from the system in China, you really have to choose the appropriate venue. Otherwise, you suffer from all sorts of local protectionism issues, and you really don't get a fair trial. Now, the civil law system is entirely different to anything we've ever experienced. Here in the United States, we have a common law system, and in China, decisions are not binding on lower courts. So what the Supreme Court may decide, lower courts don't have to follow those precedents. Now, the Supreme Court, they periodically issue judicial interpretations that are formally binding, but at the moment, these aren't really, they don't happen as much as you'd like to think, only with major issues. Now as China sort of reforms and grows, there is a big push to have the High Court, the Supreme Court, publish more judicial decisions to assist lower court judges in making their difficult decisions. And this is becoming increasingly accessible due to the internet, of course. Now, government influence in the legal affairs also adds to major unpredictability. And as I talked about, the Chinese courts are not entirely independent, where you have local administrators really pushing their agenda on the courts. And we talked about local protectionism, and the Chinese judges decide all facts, all matters of fact in law. Now, as I said, they're paid and appointed by their local administration, and they don't have life tenure, and their tenure can be revoked at any time by the local Congress. It's not even a concern. If the judge makes a bad decision, they're out. So they really take into consideration before they make a decision. They want to make sure that they maintain their job, and at the end of the day, if it's a really contentious matter, they'd rather side with the locals, and then it's somebody else's problem, not theirs. They did their job. On the other hand, however, in terms of major international cases coming in, there is a lot of pressure to sort of take careful consideration and account into the overall situation, so foreigners do get their fair share, do get, I guess, their day in court. Now, it is very, very difficult to win and enforce judgments against local parties, especially when it involves state-owned enterprises or major Chinese companies. And so there is a lot of local protectionism being influenced there as well. Now, you'll probably find it interesting to know in China there is no formal discovery process, zero. Each party bears their own burden of proof to put forth their evidence. Now, when you have problems, if you get into a business dispute with a company or an IP dispute, for you to go in and say, listen, I need these documents that show you made a mistake, the Chinese company's going to laugh at you and tell you to leave. And so it's really difficult to get the necessary evidence put forth before the court. So each party kind of builds their own case and has to submit it to the court, and there's no exchanging of documents. And damages are extremely low in China. Everybody questions, asks me questions, say, how much money can I get from an infringer? There's not a whole heck of a lot. Damages for certainly IP infringement is based on the illegal profits of the infringer, which you're never going to know, and so it's not very much. The cost of litigation is quite low. It's a fast process. There's very low overhead among the Chinese law firms, and so to litigate an entire case, you're looking at something like $50,000 from start to finish. Oftentimes, getting damages can be quite difficult to collect. There are a lot of situations where when there's a judgment against a Chinese company, they'll simply bankrupt their company, take all their assets, close the bank account, and move across the street and form some other company, and then essentially you're left with nothing. I know it's sort of a difficult situation in China, but things are dramatically improving in this sense. Now, enforcing domestic judgments are very difficult. There's a lot of bias against the foreigners, which we've talked about, and it's difficult to get injunctions, to seize assets, or to have to obtain specific performance. Now, once a judgment is issued, if it's a small localized situation in a local court, oftentimes the losing party will simply take their assets out of the region, and then there's nothing you can do. The local court's hands are tied, so essentially you're out of luck. So in this situation, it's actually very, very good to have the court preserve the evidence to try to use a higher court that has a greater reach. As I mentioned, the Chinese courts really stress the importance of mediation, where both parties come to the table to hopefully find an amicable solution to the problem. Foreign judgments are a little bit easier, I guess. Now, you have to bring your petition before court for recognition and enforcement, and you're going to have no luck unless there's a relevant international treaty. There has to be sort of a bilateral treaty between your country and China. Otherwise, the Chinese courts will say, this doesn't mean anything to me, and there's nothing really you can do. Arbitration is a wildly popular thing in China, and it's improving. I guess it's increasing the number of cases every single year. Now, to arbitrate in China, you have to have, in the contract, there has to be clear intent to arbitrate. You need to have the language, the governing law. You need to lay out everything on the table. Otherwise, it leaves the potential for misunderstanding and for some party to say, I didn't agree to this, and then you get into all sorts of other disputes. Now, ad hoc arbitration is not permissible, and it will essentially deem the arbitration clause in any agreement you have with the Chinese completely void. So anytime you have a problem, you try to want to avoid the courts. Now, the validity of an arbitration clause will be referred to a court, but that prevents it contributes to more court interference. And this will cause delays and cause all sorts of problems where the court will analyze the agreement as a whole, not looking at the arbitration clause in itself. And so you run into all sorts of problems and delays. Thankfully, China is a party to the New York Convention on the Enforcement of Arbitral Awards. And just to briefly speak about that, what it is it's an international treaty where if you have an arbitral award in a country that is a party to this treaty, you can actually enforce that arbitral award in the defendant's or the losing party's home country and to try to go after their assets there, so long as the defendant's home country is also a party. So China cannot refuse to enforce a foreign arbitral award, especially under the auspices of the New York Convention. However, just as I spoke about, the actual enforcement getting assets is extremely difficult in China because, a Chinese company has no problem simply emptying their bank account or moving their goods out of, around the country, and essentially you're following it go. So it's very difficult at times. So what we recommend and others recommend is anytime you're negotiating with the Chinese or forming an agreement with the Chinese, it's imperative to try to bind some of their assets outside of Chinese jurisdiction. Hong Kong is very popular. Singapore is very popular. Even the United States at times, although the Chinese, at least in my experience, are very hesitant to agree to that in the United States. But at least you have some sort of guarantee on their property and their assets in case you do end up in a dispute. In China, you have to know who you're dealing with. There's a position called a legal representative of a corporation. They're the only ones that can bind the company. That's it. They have something called a chop, which is a stamp that they stamp on the document, and their signature is the only one that can really bind the corporation. Oftentimes, you'll have the president or the chairman of the board or whomever sign a document. The only way to really make it 100% legally binding is when you have the legal representative involved. And a legal representative is liable for the acts of the corporation. They bear all the responsibilities. And so one of the biggest problems in China is when people undergo commercial dealings with the corporation, the president will sign the agreement, the chairman, the general manager, whomever, and it's all official in your mind. But the legal representative is one of the individuals. They have got to stamp the form. Otherwise, essentially, you have a person who's unauthorized to bind the corporation. And if you get into some dispute, they simply say, you know what? This is not an authorized contract. I'm sorry. Too bad. Sorry we breached the agreement. It wasn't real anyway. So this is a very important thing to know. Finally, we're going to talk about some commercial considerations here. Now, China is a very, very interesting place, and the cultural and business differences are so vast and so different from the United States. And oftentimes, even myself, I'm sort of venturing into unfamiliar waters. Before I went to China for the first time, somebody told me, they said, Aaron, and there's a famous quote, that a Westerner will never fully understand how to do business in China. Every day I'm there and I learn more, I realize how little I actually know. I think I'm comfortable in a certain area and I think I understand Chinese culture and their way of doing business, and there'll be a situation that'll completely knock me off my feet, and I realize I have a lot to learn. In China, the notion of face, giving and showing face, is very important. That's where you actually show respect to the right individual. You speak to the right person. You don't necessarily deal with somebody who doesn't have authorization. You just have to show overt respect to the appropriate person. It's really important to build relationships. Everything in China is relationship driven and establishing connections. You've got to take your time. There's no hurry. In my personal dealings with China, oftentimes the Chinese, one of the parties, will attempt to hurry the foreigners along. Listen, come on, we have to hurry this up. I know you have a plane to catch. Let's go. They'll schedule a day of meetings for something that should take a week. And so take your time. There's no hurry. Oftentimes foreigners will make concessions knowing that they have to get on a plane and go back to the United States, and they want to have some sort of substantive result and produce something from their trip to China. Guanxi, it's important to cultivate. Guanxi is the notion of really building your connections, establishing connections in the government, heads of organizations, at law firms, the right people. So if you do encounter any problems, you can simply call somebody, call in a favor, and get things solved for you. Pecking order is very important to consider. As I mentioned, you have to talk to the right person. If you speak to a subordinate, it could throw the whole deal off because you didn't necessarily show the appropriate person face. Now, here's an interesting quote. The individual is subordinate to the organization. The minority is subordinate to the majority. The lower level is subordinate to the higher level. It's an interesting quote from Mao Zedong, and this is sort of encapsulated and prevalent in every single Chinese corporation. Everybody realizes that the company is the most important thing, and everybody's very group-oriented. They don't like to work on something on an individual basis. They talk amongst themselves. And actually, in China, people refuse to take personal responsibility. In terms of problems, they would rather let something fester and blow up until you have a major issue before admitting mistake or fault at the outset. And finally, you'll notice in your dealings with the Chinese, they're very, very hesitant to offer an opinion in front of others. They don't want to be the center of attention or have the spotlight on them, or to put forth their opinion or notion that might embarrass somebody else or cause somebody else to have a loss of face. And so if you center on someone and ask them an individual question, they'll probably put their head down and just say, I don't know, when you know very well that they're an expert in the field. But they don't want to present their opinion in front of others. So these are just some tricks, I think, that, I guess from my general experience, that I think is important to know when you're negotiating on the business front or whatever it is with China. You've got to control the schedule and the meeting place. The Chinese, in my experience, are very notorious for having the foreigners travel a long way or meeting at restaurants or really trying to be on the Chinese home field with their people. And so when you're dealing with the Chinese, again, in my experience, it's important to schedule the meeting times and meeting place. You don't want to have them late at night when you're tired, you're jet lagged. You want to have them in the middle of the day where you're at your sharpest. I hate to say threaten to do business elsewhere, but unfortunately, oftentimes, that's what you have to do. You'll negotiate and jockey and run into certain issues that potentially you can't solve with the counterparty you're dealing with. And the minute you threaten to get up and walk away or go to a competitor, the floodgates open up and everyone's really enthusiastic about talking and finding a solution. Oftentimes, the friendship card is pulled to extract concessions. If you're on a business trip for 4 days, you will have 3.5 days of being buddy-buddy, visiting the families, going to dinners, going to events together, really becoming your best friend. And then in the 11th hour, when you're negotiating a contract or trying to get the deal done, you're sort of hesitant to make these dramatic concessions because you don't want to upset your new friend who you're doing business with. I always sort of smile when I talk about this. Excess entertainment in China is really a key for them to gain competitive advantage. We have a lot of clients that come over to China to meet with their foreign counterparties, and for those 3 days, they are out partying it up, dancing, going to clubs and bars and enjoying themselves and having these lavish dinners and whatnot. And then when they're at their most vulnerable, after they've had 6 drinks or whatever, the Chinese will simply pull out the contract and say, you know what, let's talk about this point. And after you've had this stuff called baijiu, which is essentially drinking petroleum in China, it's really bad. Essentially, the only thing you want to do, I guarantee, not from personal experience, but so I've heard, is the only thing you want to do is get back to your hotel room. You don't want to simply talk about and hash out an important issue in a contract. So it's something to be mindful of. Preparation is key. You've got to know every detail of the deal, every detail of the contract, or whatever you're dealing with. And it's important to present competitor information. There's a saying in China that 2 competing factories will negotiate themselves into bankruptcy for your business. So knowing what the competitors charge or what you can get is really a wonderful business tool. Finally, it's really essential to talk about every last detail of a contract before you sign it. One of the defenses to contract in China is sort of a lack of mutual understanding, which is the same thing, I guess, here. You need to have a meeting of the minds, but it's sort of a business tool in China where they'll go before the court and say, oh, I didn't understand what this meant. I didn't know we had to pay for this product. I don't understand what's going on. And courts are very sympathetic to a lack of understanding because they think that the big bad foreigner is trying to exert their wonderful legal knowledge from overseas on the Chinese. And finally, it's really important to be patient. A lot of times people run into China hoping to get that fast deal. Let's make some money. Let's find a trading partner. Let's do business. I need to bring something home, and so let's sign this contract before I get on the plane. But some of the most successful cases I've seen are those companies that come back to China 2, 3, 4 times before they actually ink a deal. It shows you're committed, you have dedication to the process, and you're not making any impulsive decision that could potentially, cause you to end up having significant problems in China. Anyway, I think that is it. So thank you, everybody, so much for your time. I really appreciate the opportunity to stand before you today in front of law students, my former law professors. And it's very interesting to be on this side of the podium when I'm wondering if I should make you stand up and ask you questions about what I just spoke about. No. But it's such a pleasure to be here and so happy to have this opportunity at TU. And thank you all so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And I'm happy to entertain any questions you have about China or what I spoke about or why I went to China, what it's really like there. So please, Professor Allison. Dean Allison, I'm sorry.
This is a frivolous question maybe, but is there anything about your former profession that's helped you here?
My former profession?
Or law school profession?
That's not necessarily so much. I guess in my former profession, I was selling wine around the world. And so I guess I gained that international perspective and was able to sort of understand other cultures and understand the way other cultures did business. And before I actually went to China, it was actually lived there. I've been there for 2 years. I worked for a manufacturing company who is producing products in China. I was going over to essentially make products that were trademark protected and not sold in China, but sold here in the United States. And so going over to China, I had a lot of experience going to and from and dealing with the Chinese and understanding how the system works in China. And I guess, Dean Allison, it's helped me to, I guess, gain a better perspective on China as a whole, and so it's assisted me, in my present position. Well, yes, sir.
Bankruptcy law in China, is it? I'm sure it's different than here, but prevalent, a lot of bankruptcies filed?
Yeah. I don't deal specifically on the bankruptcy side, although you hear about situations all the time. Bankruptcy, there aren't, at least in my understanding, there aren't any real requirements to file for bankruptcy. Companies can simply liquidate all their assets, claim bankruptcy to avoid any sort of liabilities, and simply walk away. It's an area of law that's certainly developing and hopefully improving, but at the moment it's sort of, you can declare bankruptcy and on a whim. There aren't any real requirements that you have to follow. Yeah, but it is very challenging, especially in trying to do business. When you receive an award, companies would much rather simply go bankrupt instead of paying out. So it is quite challenging. And I have business cards and contact information for anyone who has a question that they think of later or is curious about China, I guess, as a whole. I'm more than happy to answer any questions. I'm really good about emailing. In fact, it was my New Year's resolution this year to be a lot better, so I think so far so good. And here we are in late October. I'm going to make it through the year. But but anyway, again, thank you all so much for the opportunity. I appreciate everyone taking their time this afternoon to come and say hi, and I hope I was able to provide some insight as to China. All right, thank you, everyone.